The envelope was sitting on the kitchen counter when I got home from my shift, and I knew before I even touched it that everything was about to change. It had my mother-in-law's handwriting on the front. That careful, slanted cursive she used for anything she considered official. I'd seen it on birthday cards, on the label of casserole dishes she brought over, on the note she left when she watered our plants while we were in Savannah for our anniversary. But this wasn't a birthday card. I set my purse down. I didn't open it right away. My husband, I'll call him what he was by the end of all this, a stranger wearing the face of someone I used to love, wasn't home yet. I had maybe 40 minutes before I heard his truck in the driveway. So I stood in my own kitchen, the one I'd picked the backsplash tiles for, the one where I'd learned to make his grandmother's cornbread, because I wanted him to feel like I was trying, and I stared at that envelope like it might tell me something before I opened it. I'd been married to him for 6 years. We bought the house in year 2, a craftsman bungalow in a suburb outside of Atlanta, 3 bedrooms, a backyard that flooded every spring, and a front porch swing that I loved more than almost anything we owned. My name was on the mortgage, so was his. That felt important once. It felt like proof of something. His name is Lawrence. I should say that now because it matters later. The way he signed things, the way he insisted on being the one whose name appeared first on every document, every account, every decision that involved the two of us. Lawrence Aldrich. He liked the sound of it. He said it slowly sometimes when he was on the phone with contractors or at the bank, like he was tasting something good. I opened the envelope. It was a letter from his mother. 2 pages, handwritten. She apologized in the first line, which told me everything I needed to know about what came after it. She wrote that she loved me. She wrote that she had always considered me a daughter. She wrote that she was sorry she hadn't said anything sooner, that she'd told herself it wasn't her place, that marriages were private, and she didn't want to interfere. And then she wrote what she actually needed to tell me. Lawrence had been having an affair for 2 years. The woman's name was Christine. She worked at his firm. His mother had found out 3 months ago when Christine called the house. His parents, the landline his father still refused to disconnect, looking for Lawrence because he wasn't answering his cell. His mother said Christine didn't realize who she was talking to until it was too late. She wrote, "I'm telling you because you deserve to know. And because I saw how you looked at my son on your wedding day, and I don't think he has ever deserved it." I read that sentence 4 times. Then I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and put it inside my tote bag underneath my work badge and my water bottle, and the paperback I'd been carrying around for 3 weeks without reading a single page. I went upstairs. I washed my face. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a long time, not crying, just looking at myself the way you look at something you're trying to memorize. Before I get into what happened next, tell me in the comments, has anyone ever had someone else tell you the truth your partner was hiding? How did that feel? Because I want to know I'm not alone in this. I need to back up a little, because the house matters. The house is the whole point of this story, and I need you to understand what it meant before I can explain what I did with it. We bought it in 2020. The market was insane, but Lawrence had gotten a bonus from his firm. He's a civil engineer, good salary, solid career, and I was working as a pediatric occupational therapist, which doesn't pay what it should, but we were doing fine. We were doing more than fine. We were the couple that other couples looked at and said, "You two make it look easy." I was the one who found the house. I drove past it on a Saturday morning when I was supposed to be going to the pharmacy, and I pulled over because the porch swing was moving in the wind, and something about it made me feel like I'd been there before. I called Lawrence from the car. I said, "I found our house." He laughed, but he came. We put in an offer that afternoon. The down payment was split. 30% came from my savings. Money I'd been putting away since I was 23. Money I'd been careful with in a way that sometimes felt lonely when my friends were booking vacations, and I was moving money into a high-yield savings account. Lawrence put in the other 70. He made more. That was fine. We were a team. What wasn't fine, though I didn't know it at the time, was how Lawrence talked about the house after we moved in. It was subtle. The kind of thing you don't notice until you're looking back and counting. He'd say my house sometimes instead of our house. He'd make decisions about the yard or the driveway without asking me. When his coworkers came over for the 4th of July, he gave them the tour and I heard him say, "I found this place actually." Drove by it one day and just knew. I let it go. You let things go in a marriage. You pick your battles. You tell yourself it doesn't mean anything. I see now that it meant everything. The night I found the letter, I didn't say a word to Lawrence. He came home at 6:15, kissed me on the cheek, Asked what was for dinner like it was any other Tuesday. I'd made pasta. I sat across from him at the table. I'd refinished by hand the summer before, and I watched him eat, and I thought, I have been living in a story someone else wrote for me. He talked about a project at work. He talked about his buddy's upcoming bachelor party in Nashville. He talked about whether we should repaint the back bedroom. I nodded. I said the right things. I did not look at my tote bag sitting by the door. That night, after he fell asleep, I lay in the dark for a long time, not thinking, or maybe thinking so hard it felt like nothing, like static. I got up around 2 in the morning. I went downstairs. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of chamomile tea I didn't drink, and I started reading, not about divorce, not yet. About property, about what happens to a jointly owned home in Georgia when a marriage ends, about who gets what and how and why. I want to be honest about something. I am not someone who schemes. I am not someone who plots. I am a person who makes careful decisions after doing thorough research, and if that looks like scheming in retrospect, I think that's a reflection of how little people expect women to protect themselves. I read until 4 in the morning. Then I went back to bed, and I slept better than I had in months. I gave myself 2 weeks before I did anything. Not because I needed time to decide. I had decided somewhere between reading his mother's letter and watching him eat pasta and not feeling anything, but because I needed to understand the full picture before I moved. I'd learned that from work, actually. In OT, you don't start treatment until you have a complete assessment. You don't guess. You look at everything, and then you act. The first thing I did was call my sister, Daphne. She's 4 years older than me, and she married a man who happened to be a family law attorney in Fulton County, which I had never once thought about until suddenly it was the most important fact in my life. I drove to her house on a Wednesday afternoon, when Lawrence thought I was at a yoga class I don't actually attend. I sat at her dining room table and I told her everything. She didn't say I'm so sorry. She said, okay, let me call Martin. Martin, my brother-in-law, came home early from his office. He sat across from me, and he asked the kind of questions that don't feel good, but tell you someone is actually paying attention. He asked about the down payment, about whose name was on the mortgage, about the equity we'd built, about whether Lawrence had ever tried to add or remove anything from the deed. He had. Once Lawrence had suggested we refinance in 2022 and had mentioned, casually, that it might be simpler to put the mortgage in his name, only since his credit score was higher. I had said no. I hadn't understood why I was saying no, exactly. It had just felt wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Martin nodded slowly when I told him that, like I'd said something important. Good, Martin said. You protected yourself without knowing you were protecting yourself. I thought about that for a long time afterward. Georgia is an equitable distribution state. That means marital property isn't automatically split 50-50. A judge decides what's fair based on a long list of factors, including contributions to the marriage, economic circumstances, and conduct. Fault, like adultery, can be considered. Martin walked me through all of it. He told me what to document, what to preserve, what not to touch. He also told me something I hadn't expected. I was entitled to move out of the marital home and get temporary spousal support while the divorce was pending. If I chose, I didn't have to stay. I didn't have to stay. I kept coming back to those 4 words the whole drive home. Here is what I did, and I want to be careful explaining this, because I need you to understand I did everything legally, everything above board. I'm not telling this story to brag about being clever. I'm telling it because I think a lot of people, a lot of women especially, don't know what they're entitled to when someone they trusted decides their life is worth less than a secret. Over the next 10 days, I gathered documents, financial statements, mortgage records, every receipt and tax return I could access from the shared filing cabinet in the office. I photographed them, emailed them to myself, and sent copies to Martin. I opened a checking account at a different bank, one where Lawrence wasn't listed, and I began directing a portion of my paycheck there, which Martin confirmed I was entitled to do. I called a therapist. This sounds small, but it wasn't. Her name is Yvonne, and she works out of a small office near Decatur, and in our first session I cried for 45 minutes about the porch swing. She didn't rush me. She let me cry about the swing. I began quietly, carefully, moving things that were mine, things I'd brought into the marriage or bought with my own money, out of the house a little at a time. A box here, a bag there. Daphne stored everything in her guest room. She didn't ask a lot of questions. She just made me tea when I dropped things off and told me she'd been worried about me for a long time. I know, I said. You didn't want to hear it, she said. I know that too. On a Thursday evening, 13 days after I found the letter, Martin filed the divorce petition on my behalf. Lawrence didn't know yet. The process server would handle that. I want to stop here and tell you about the last normal night, because I think it matters. The Wednesday before Lawrence was served, we had dinner at home. I'd made lemon herb chicken, his favorite, which I've since made my peace with, because it's also mine and I'm not going to stop making it. We ate. He poured wine. He was in a good mood, talking about a project that had gotten approved, laughing at something one of his coworkers had said. And I sat there across from him, and I looked at the kitchen, the backsplash tiles, the refinished table, the little herb garden on the windowsill that I'd started from seeds, and I thought, I built this. I built all of this. And he thought he could take it from me without me noticing. He looked up from his plate and smiled at me. You're quiet tonight. Just tired, I said. He nodded and went back to eating. That was the last time I sat at that table with him as his wife. He was served on a Friday afternoon. I know this because I was at Daphne's house when Martin got the confirmation, and she handed me a glass of iced water and said, "It's done." I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt the way you feel when a very long storm finally breaks. Not happy, just relieved. Just profoundly, exhaustedly relieved. I was staying at Daphne's full-time by then. I'd told Lawrence on the Wednesday evening after I found the letter that I was going to spend some time at my sister's, that I needed space. He'd look surprised. He'd asked if something was wrong. I told him we'd talk soon. I did not cry. I put my pre-packed bag in the car while he stood in the kitchen doorway looking confused, and I drove away without looking in the rearview mirror. He called 11 times that night. I didn't answer. I texted him, "I need a few days, please give me that." He texted back, "Okay, I love you." I stared at those 3 words for a long time. Then I put my phone face down on Daphne's guest bed and looked at the ceiling. The next day, he called my mother. He called his mother, not knowing she was the one who had written the letter. He called 2 of our couple friends asking if they'd heard from me. I know all of this because people told me. They always tell you. He also, and this is the part that sealed something in me permanently, called a real estate attorney to ask about his options if a spouse abandoned the marital home. He called a real estate attorney before he called a marriage counselor. I found out from Martin, who found out through channels I won't get into. But the moment I heard that, the last small soft part of me that had been wondering if there was another explanation, if maybe his mother had misunderstood, if maybe it wasn't what it seemed, that part went quiet. He had been thinking about the house. Before anything else, before understanding what was happening or why, he had been thinking about the house. The divorce petition reached him on a Friday. By Friday evening, he had called Martin's office 3 times. Martin did not take the calls. Lawrence called me at 8:15 that night. I was sitting in Daphne's backyard in one of her Adirondack chairs, watching the fireflies, and my phone lit up with his name. I let it ring. Then I listened to the voicemail. He sounded like himself, which was the strangest part. Not panicked, not broken, confused in that particular way that suggested he still thought this was something that was happening to him, rather than something he had caused. "I don't understand what's going on," he said. "Whatever I did, we can talk about this. This is our home. This is our life. Please call me back." Whatever. 2 years. A woman named Christine. Whatever. I didn't call him back that night. I went inside and helped Daphne make popcorn, and we watched a movie she'd been wanting to see, and I laughed twice at things that were genuinely funny, and both times it surprised me. I'm going to skip ahead a few months, because the legal process was long and not particularly cinematic. There were negotiations, there were attorneys. There were depositions that I will not discuss in detail, because some things are private even when you're telling the rest of the story. What I will tell you is this. I asked for the house. Not because I needed it. Not because I couldn't have found somewhere else to live, built something new, started over. I asked for it because my name was on that mortgage from the beginning. Because I was the one who had stopped on a Saturday morning and pulled over because a porch swing was moving in the wind. Because I had refinished the dining table and chosen the backsplash tiles and grown herbs from seeds on the kitchen windowsill. Because I had said no when Lawrence had wanted to remove my name from the deed, not knowing exactly why I was saying no, only knowing that I needed to, because he had started saying my house before there was a reason to, and I had let it go too many times, and I was done letting things go. Georgia law does not guarantee any particular outcome. Martin was honest with me about that from the beginning. But we had documentation, we had contributions, we had the letter from his mother, which she agreed to provide as a statement, which I know cost her something enormous, and which I have never once taken for granted. And Lawrence had called a real estate attorney on the same day he was served with divorce papers, which his own lawyer later had to explain to the judge, had been a misunderstanding of priorities. The mediation took 3 sessions. On the 3rd session, Lawrence agreed to a settlement. The house went to me. He had 60 days to vacate. I want to tell you about the day I got the keys back. Lawrence had moved his things out over 2 weekends in October, and I had not been present for either. The house sat empty for a little while. I wanted it to breathe before I went back. I'm not sure I can explain that better than that, but it felt important to let it reset. On a Saturday morning in November, Daphne drove me over. She parked at the curb, and she said, "Do you want me to come in or wait here?" "Wait here," I said. I walked up the front path alone. The yard needed work. Some of his things had left marks. A circular stain on the hardwood floor where a piece of furniture had been. Some scuffs on the hallway wall. The kitchen had a strange emptiness because he'd taken the espresso machine, which technically had been a joint gift, but I let it go because I was going to let myself let one thing go, and that was the thing. I walked through every room. I stood in the kitchen and looked at the backsplash tiles. I went out the back door and checked the herb garden, which had mostly survived because Daphne's daughter had been coming by to water things. I stood in the room I'd been thinking of as the guest room and decided it was going to be my office. Then I went out the front door and I sat down on the porch swing. It was November, so it was cool, maybe 50 degrees, and the leaves were mostly down and the neighborhood was quiet in that particular Saturday morning way. I sat there for a long time, just moving back and forth a little, looking at the street. I didn't feel like I'd won. I want to be clear about that. Winning implies there was a competition, and what I'd actually been doing this whole time was surviving something I hadn't chosen and protecting something that was already mine. But I felt like myself. Maybe more than I had in years. Like I'd come back to something, not to Lawrence, not to who I was when I married him, but to some earlier version of myself who knew what she needed and wasn't afraid to go get it. Lawrence reached out once, about 4 months later. An email. He said he'd been seeing a therapist. He said he understood now that he'd made choices that were selfish and destructive. He said he hoped I was doing well. I read the email in my kitchen on a Tuesday morning, standing at the counter in my robe with my coffee. The herb garden was back in full bloom. The dining table was refinished again. I'd redone it over Thanksgiving weekend, because I wanted to put my own hands on it one more time, start fresh. I wrote back 3 sentences. I said I was glad he was getting support. I said I hoped he took care of himself. I said I didn't need anything from him. I have not heard from him since. His mother calls me occasionally. Not often. She's careful about it. Thoughtful. She sent flowers when I moved back in. When she calls, we don't talk about Lawrence. We talk about her garden and about her grandkids. My nieces through Daphne, and sometimes about nothing much at all. I think she feels guilt that isn't entirely hers to carry, and I try to tell her that when I can. She's the one who told me the truth when she didn't have to. When it would have been easier to stay quiet. I haven't forgotten that, and I won't. There's a thing that Yvonne said to me early in our sessions, when I was still in the thick of all of it, still waking up at 2 in the morning with that static feeling in my head. She said, "You keep calling what you did protecting yourself, like you need to apologize for it. What if you just called it surviving?" I thought about that for a long time. I think I've landed somewhere between two. I survived, yes. But I also made choices, clear-eyed, documented, deliberate choices. That meant I didn't come out of this with nothing. I came out with the house, with my name on the deed, with my herb garden and my porch swing and my table that I have now refinished twice with my own 2 hands. I came out knowing exactly what I'm worth. A lot of people in situations like this, people who've been lied to, who've had the ground pulled out from under them, they spend so much energy fighting, yelling, threatening, trying to hurt the person who hurt them. I understand that impulse. I felt it. There were nights at Daphne's house when I lay in the guest bed and thought of things I wanted to say to Lawrence that I will not repeat here. But fighting would have cost me everything. The anger, the scenes, the retaliation. It all would have worked against me in that mediation room. So I did something that felt harder and stranger and lonelier than fighting. I went quiet. I got organized. I made sure that when the moment came, everything I needed was already in place. And by the time Lawrence realized something was wrong, it was already over. I still sit on the porch swing most mornings when the weather allows it. Coffee in hand, usually still in my robe, watching the neighborhood wake up. Sometimes Daphne's family comes over on weekends, and the kids run around the backyard, and the house sounds like what I always thought it would sound like. It's mine. Not in the way Lawrence used to say my house, not as a claim, not as a power move, not as something to stand over, Mine in the way that a thing can only be yours when you've worked for it and chosen it, and refused to let it be taken. I never needed Lawrence to give it to me. It was mine from the day I pulled over on that Saturday morning, because a porch swing was moving in the wind, and something in me said, stop. I just needed to remember that.